guys, it's Steffi from the Novelty Corner and welcome back to my channel and welcome to another Books Beside My Bed video. I film one of these videos every week where I wrap up the last 7 days worth of reading. So if you're new here, welcome. And if you are a long-time subscriber, welcome back. I'm glad to have you here and I'm going to jump straight into my wrap up for this week. This is my reading week from the 31st of March until the 6th of April. I read 7 books this week, a total of 2,438 pages, and my yearly reading total is up to 84 books. I'm currently reading my 85th book, which is Forged in Fire by Trish McCallum, which is a paranormal military romance book thing that I just started on a whim last night because I felt like it, because I just sort of needed a break from some of the things that I'd been reading, which happens a lot and may happen a lot because I'm now on 2 weeks holiday and I am planning to read all of the things, which is good for my OWLS Readathon and also good for the fact that I've got things that I need to get through that aren't on OWLS Readathon lists. The first book that I read this week was The Orchardist Daughter. This is a 2019 release from Allen and Unwin and I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. It was an unsolicited review copy that was sent to me, but I do thank them very much for sending it. It is set in a small remote town in Tasmania. It's a timber town, so they have a lot of people who work in cutting down the trees for the timber industry. And we follow 2 main characters. There is Leon, who is new to this town. He is a park ranger in his mid to late 20s, and being a park ranger in a timber town is not an easy thing to do. There's a lot of prejudice against them. He's coming from a background where his father has been abusive to his mother and he was living with them sort of as a buffer, and now he's had to leave. He's had to start fresh and just sort of live his life, and so he's still got that in the back of his mind. But when he comes to this town, he's able to reconnect with his grandfather, who he hasn't had a lot to do with in recent years. Our second main character is Michaela, or Mickey, and she is nearly 18 years old, and right at the start of the book we find out that there's been a tragic accident that has left both her parents dead, and she's now currently living with her brother. They own a small takeaway place in this town, and her brother is very controlling and basically keeps Mickey prisoner in her life. So she doesn't really know anything else. She's been homeschooled her whole life and she doesn't really interact with a lot of people outside of when they come into the shop. The story is really about learning about who you are, being resilient, being able to break free from situations that are not of your own making, and trusting other people. And it was just really, really wonderful. There's also a third character, Max, who is a young boy in the story, and Max's story sort of connects both Mickey and Leon's, and it was just very atmospheric, very engaging, and I couldn't put it down once I started it. I did read this for my OWLS Readathon. I read it for the Charms Challenge to read an adult book, and I highly recommend it. Next, I reread Legendary by Stephanie Garber. This was a 2018 release from Hodder and Stratton, and I gave it 5 out of 5 stars again because I enjoyed this series. I did read this for the OWLS Readathon Potions Challenge, which was to read a sequel. This is obviously the sequel to Caraval. Being a sequel, kind of hard to go into, but this story follows Tella, who is Scarlett's sister. It is her quest to find out what happened to her mother, and as such she crosses paths with various characters who may or may not be related to the Grandmaster legend. This one I loved so much more than Caraval. I enjoy Caraval because it is a fast, easy read, it is entertaining, and it is something I can read in a couple of hours. Legendary I found even quicker. It's a longer story, but I still sped through it. Tella is just a fantastic character. She doesn't really put up with crap from anyone, and I loved the development of her relationship with Dante in this. It was very push and pull. I love the fact that we are bringing in more magic into this fantasy world in the form of perhaps former gods who had power, and it was just really fun. I'm very much looking forward to finale. I have pre-ordered the Fairy Loot finale box because I'm just that excited. Next, for the OWLS Readathon, I read Blackout by Michael Pryor. This was published in 2000 by Hodder, I think. Yes, by Hodder. And I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. I read it for the Challenge History of Magic, read a book that was 10 or more years older, being published in 2000. This is quite a bit older. It is also a Lovers YA book as well, and I really enjoy Michael Pryor's work, and I've had this on my shelf for ages. I'm pretty sure I read it because it's actually signed and personalized to me at some point in time. I don't know when that happened, and I have since met Michael Pryor and he's absolutely lovely. I've obviously read it at some point, but I couldn't remember it, which is why I picked it up. It was a fast, easy read. It is a dystopian story. It kicks off when an electromagnetic pulse sort of strikes the world and the world grinds to a screaming halt, and basically people don't really know what to do. We follow a couple of main characters. The first two are Holly and Alex. Holly and Alex are brother and sister, and at the beginning of this book they basically wake up after the pulse has hit and they have been in a car accident and Alex is quite badly hurt. So Holly is one of our character perspectives, and she is telling their story as they try and find their way back to their parents and back to a normal life. Then our second point of view character is Tony, and he has taken his younger brother Paulie and escaped from an abusive family situation and are on a train trying to escape to the city when the pulse strikes, and it is their journey about what happens next. And that story is quite heartbreaking along the way. Just be aware that it's sort of very confronting as you get towards the end of the book. It is very short, very easy to read. It's a dystopian book. I really enjoyed it and I need to read some more of Michael Pryor's backlist. My next book for the OWLS Readathon was A Court of Thorns and Roses by Sarah J Maas. This is the first book in the series. It obviously needs no introduction. It's very, very popular and well known on BookTube. I read this for the Runes challenge, which was to read a retelling. This is obviously a Beauty and the Beast retelling. And it is the story of Feyre, who lives with her family in quite an impoverished situation, and she goes out day after day and hunts animals for them so that they can survive. And then one day she shoots a massive wolf, and it turns out that this wolf is a fae. And as recompense for killing one of the fae, she is forced to leave her family and live in the Spring Court with the High Lord of the Spring Court, Tamlin. And things sort of flow on from there, and there is a whole lot of political and magical intrigue going on. There is a very dark power that has held sway over the fairylands for 50 years, and eventually it is up to Feyre to sort of break that cycle. It is not a book without its problems, I acknowledge that, and it was published in 2015 by Bloomsbury. I forgot to say that at the start. Originally I gave it 4 stars. I've actually upped it to 5 stars only because I sped through this. This is the first time I've read the hardcover edition. I did have my soft copies, but I have since passed those on to a friend because I have a complete set of the hardcovers. It was kind of nostalgic for me. This was one of the first books that I read because of BookTube, and I remember speeding through it then, but this time I just read it and there was so much that I enjoyed about the story. I don't often go into fantasy books and just love being in the world, but coming back to this world was just like coming home, even though, you know, I know what happens later in the series. But this was just, it was such a pleasure to go back and read it. It will be something that I continue to reread. Next time I read it, I think I'll go through and not just annotate with tabs, but I'll actually write in the book. But yeah, I enjoyed going back. And because I enjoyed that so much, I completely veered off my OWLS TBR and read Accordionist and Fury, which is the second book in the Court of Thorns and Roses series by Sarah J Maas. This was published in 2016 by Bloomsbury. I gave this one 5 out of 5 stars. This is my favourite book in the series because you have the huge shift between what you thought was going to happen at the end of A Court of Thorns and Roses and what became Accordionist and Fury, and this one definitely needs no introduction. I think most people enjoy this book the most in the series, but it is what happens in the aftermath of A Court of Thorns and Roses as Feyre deals with a lot of post-traumatic stress and has to deal with what it means to be in a relationship that is not what you expected it to be. I mean, the main thing about this book is that we finally get to go to the Night Court and we explore the relationship that Rhys has with his people, and we meet the inner circle, and that's just a whole lot of fun. I mean, team goals, inner circle, really. So I loved being back in this world, and for me personally, it's just like going, and now I get to be obsessed with Asriel again because that's what I do. I read this very, very quickly. Clearly I'm articulate when I'm just gushing over things that are very nostalgic for me. Then I read a poetry collection that I received as a review from NetGalley called Nocturnal by Wilder Poetry. This is a 2019 release. I think it is coming out in May or June, and I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. This is a beautifully illustrated book. I read it on my iPad because it was quite image heavy, and it is just stunning. I will be ordering myself a physical copy of the book because while I don't generally pick up poetry and I'm not very good at interpreting poetry, I absolutely loved flipping through this book. There were just little poems and illustrations and text choices and placement choices that just spoke to me as a very visual person. So I really did enjoy it. It is really a collection of celebrating life and acknowledging both the good and the bad. And unlike, say, some of the other poetry collections that have become popular recently, I didn't walk away with it with a sense of this person has been through a lot of trauma, and you know, this is a book about dealing with that sort of trauma. This was really about being resilient and hopeful and celebrating the wildness of yourself and life, and I really appreciated that. And then finally, I read Withering by Sea by Judith Russell. This is a middle grade lovers kids story that was published in 2014 by ABC Books. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. This was the book that was recommended to me by one of my students. He actually asked me the other day if I had read it yet, and I said I hadn't, but it was on my holiday to read list. And basically when I sped through and finished A Court of Mist and Fury and Nocturnal, and then I just went, you know what, I can read this in 2 hours, and then I've read it, and it's ticked off my list for the holidays. It is a sort of a historical mystery with some magical realism elements thrown into it. It is the first in the Stella Montgomery books. Stella lives with her 3 aunts who are relatively dreadful, and they all live together in the Hotel Majestic, and she is forced to endure all sorts of lessons on deportment and French and pianoforte, and she can't stand this life. She's very wild and very inquisitive, and this is totally at odds with what her aunts would want her to be. Withering by Sea is the town in which the Hotel Majestic stands, and one night Stella witnesses something happening in the hotel, and she witnesses the death of one of the residents, and suddenly it puts her in the firing line, and so she ends up uncovering that there is perhaps a little bit more magic in the world than she first thought, and that maybe she might be part of it. It was really fun. It was very entertaining. It was very quick to read, and I will be reading Wormwood Mire at some point, which is the second book. I'm very curious to see what Judith Russell does with these characters. I'm very glad that I did actually pick this up. So those are the books that I read this week. And they're heavy, so I'm going to put them down now. In the comments, let me know if you have read any of these books and what your thoughts are on them. Otherwise, let me know what you have been reading over the last 7 days. If you like this video, don't forget to like and subscribe. I post my weekly wrap-ups every week on Mondays. I hope that wherever you are in the world, you are having a wonderful day, and I'll catch you guys in my next video. Thanks so much for watching. Bye guys.